I have worked in municipal water systems for nearly 20 years. I am not a scientist. I am not an engineer with a wall full of degrees. I am a water operator. I maintain wells, run pump stations, check chlorine levels, and keep the infrastructure working so that when people in Brannock County turn on their taps, clean water comes out. It is not glamorous work, but it is essential work, and I have always been proud of it. My name is Liam Garrity. I'm 42 years old, and I have spent my entire adult life learning the underground hydrology of this county, the way a farmer learns his soil. I know where the aquifers sit beneath the sandstone. I know which wells draw from shallow formations and which ones reach down into the deep rock. I know how the water table behaves after heavy rains and how it drops during dry summers. I know this system the way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. And I am telling you now, while I still can, that something is wrong with the water in Brannock County, Ohio, and that every warning we were given was ignored, and that it is too late to fix what is happening here. It started on a Monday morning in late October. I was at the county's main pump station running my routine checks: flow rates, pressure readings, chlorine residuals, the ordinary mechanical rhythm of keeping water moving from the ground to people's faucets. It was a grey morning, cold, the trees almost completely bare. Southeastern Ohio in late autumn has a particular quality to it. The hills pressing close on every side, covered in leafless hardwoods and underbrush, and the sky sits low and flat like a ceiling. Everything feels exposed and closed in at the same time. I received a call from a woman named June Oleska. June lived out on Deerfield Road, one of the more remote stretches of our distribution system, deep in the eastern hollows of the county, where the roads narrow and the hills crowd together, and some of the houses have not changed hands in 3 generations. June was in her 70s, sharp-minded, and not the type to call the water department unless something was genuinely wrong. She told me the water coming out of her tap had changed, not the color, not the smell, the feel of it. She said it felt heavy, thicker than normal. She had noticed it while washing her hands. The water moved differently across her skin, she said. It clung to her fingers a little longer than water should, and it tasted different, faintly sweet, not unpleasant, but wrong, in the way that sweetness in well water drawn from sandstone is always wrong, because that water should taste like cold rock and nothing else. I took the complaint seriously. Water quality fluctuations are common in autumn when the water table shifts and ground chemistry adjusts. I told June I would come out and pull samples from her tap and from the nearest hydrant on her line. I drove east on County Road 9, the 2-lane blacktop that winds through the hollows toward Deerfield Road. The landscape out there is old coal country. The mines have been closed for decades, but the evidence of them is everywhere. Subsidence dips in the fields, sealed shaft openings on hillsides, creeks that run orange with acid mine drainage after heavy rains. The land out here has been hollowed out underneath and never quite recovered. At June's house, I ran the kitchen tap and collected a sample in a sterile bottle. I held it under the water for 30 seconds and watched it fill. She was right. I could feel it. There was a faint resistance to the water, a barely perceptible viscosity that was not normal. When I held the bottle up to the window light, the water was perfectly clear, but it moved inside the container with a slight reluctance, shifting a beat slower than water should when I tilted the bottle back and forth, like it was just barely heavier than it was supposed to be. I pulled a second sample from the fire hydrant, a quarter-mile down Deerfield Road. Same result. On the drive back toward Calvary, the county seat, I passed an older man walking along the road shoulder, Herschel Combs. Everybody in Brannock County knew Herschel. He was in his mid-80s, born and raised in these hollows, one of the last people alive who remembered the coal camps when they were still operating. He flagged me down with a wave of his cane, and I pulled over. He asked me if something was wrong with the water. I asked him how he knew. He said he could smell it. Not from the tap, from the ground. He said the hollows had been smelling sweet for about a week, especially in the early mornings when the mist sat low between the hills. He said his father had told him a long time ago that when the ground starts smelling sweet in Brannock County, something is coming up from deep underneath that is not supposed to be there. I thanked him and drove on. I was unsettled, but I was still thinking like a water operator. Seasonal variation, mineral changes in the aquifer, maybe some interaction with the old mine voids that honeycomb the rock beneath the eastern part of the county. There were explanations. There are always explanations, until there are not. I sent the samples to the county health department lab that afternoon and logged June's complaint in the system. That evening, before I left the pump station, I washed my hands in the utility sink. The water felt normal, ordinary, and I noticed something that stuck with me in a way I did not expect. Our pump station is served by the Western Wellfield, which draws from a different section of the aquifer than the Eastern wells that supply Deerfield Road and the surrounding communities. Whatever June had described was not system-wide. It was localized to the Eastern Distribution Zone, the part of the county that sits directly above the old mine workings, the part closest to whatever Herschel Combs was talking about. Over the next 4 days, more complaints came in, all from the eastern side. Residents on Deerfield Road, along Cutter Lane, and in the small communities of Bethke and Sugar Hill. Every complaint was the same. The water felt heavier than normal. It tasted faintly sweet. One man told me it reminded him of the way the air tastes before a thunderstorm, that almost metallic sweetness that sits at the back of your tongue. A woman in Sugar Hill said it tasted the way flowers smell. Several people described it as almost pleasant, and that detail bothered me more than all the others combined. People do not usually describe contaminated water as pleasant. I checked the 3 active wells that served the eastern zone. All of them were drilled into sandstone aquifers at depths between 100 and 200 feet. I inspected the wellheads, the casing integrity, the pump assemblies. Everything was mechanically sound. No cracks, no infiltration points, no obvious pathway for surface contamination to enter the system. But when I pulled samples directly from the wellheads, before the water even entered the treatment process, the sweetness was already there. That faint heaviness, that wrongness. Whatever was in the water, it was not being introduced by our pipes or our equipment. It was coming out of the ground that way. It was in the aquifer itself. I called the county health department for the lab results on June's original sample. The technician I spoke to sounded almost bored. All parameters were within acceptable limits. No bacterial contamination, no heavy metals, no volatile organic compounds, no detectable levels of anything that would trigger a regulatory flag. The water tested clean. I pushed back. I told them something was clearly different about the water, that I could feel it and taste it, and that multiple residents were reporting the same changes. They told me that without a positive result for any regulated contaminant, there was nothing actionable. They suggested the taste change might be seasonal mineral variation and told me to monitor the situation and resubmit if anything changed. I hung up the phone and sat at my desk for a while, staring at the wall. I have worked in this field long enough to know that the absence of a test result is not the same as the absence of a problem. It just means you are not testing for the right thing. Meanwhile, something else was happening that I did not understand yet. The people I talked to on the eastern side of the county were changing. June Aleska, who had called me with sharp concern about her water, now told me she thought it was fine, better than fine. She said she had grown to prefer how it tasted. She said she was drinking more water than usual because it satisfied her in a way the old water never had. There was a calm in her voice that had not been there before, a softness, like someone who has just eaten a large meal and is settling into the drowsy contentment that follows. A man on Cutter Lane, who had initially complained about the water's strange texture, told me he had been filling extra glasses throughout the day because the water made him feel rested and clear-headed. He said he had not slept that well in years. I drove back to Deerfield Road to find Herschel Combs. He was sitting on his front porch in his coat despite the cold. I told him the lab results had come back clean. He looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then he told me a story. He said this had happened before. Once, when he was a boy, in the late 1940s, the water in the eastern hollows went sweet, just like it had now. His father recognized it immediately. He would not let the family drink from their well. Instead, he hauled water from his brother's property on the western side of the county, a full hour's drive by wagon on the roads they had back then. He did this every day for 2 months. The other families in the hollow did not stop drinking. Some of them thought the sweet water was a blessing. Some of them just did not see the point of hauling water when perfectly clear water was coming out of their own taps. And over those 2 months, they changed. They became quieter, more content. They stopped driving into Calvary for supplies. They stopped attending church. They stopped visiting neighbors. Each family drew inward, like plants turning away from the sun, folding back into themselves. Then one morning in early winter, they were gone, all of them. Houses empty, beds made, dishes clean on the shelves, no forwarding addresses, no explanations. They had not packed. They had not loaded trucks. They were simply gone, as if they had dissolved. I asked Herschel what his father thought had happened. Herschel said his father believed something lived in the deep water under the eastern hills, not an animal, not a mineral deposit, something that was aware in whatever way water can be aware. that existed in the rock below the aquifers that people drew from and that occasionally reached upward into the water table for reasons that no one understood. And when it did, it made the water sweet. His father believed the sweetness was bait. I asked Herschel what happened to the empty houses. He said the county eventually sold them off for back taxes. New families moved in. The water went back to normal and stayed that way for decades. Nobody talked about what had happened. People in this part of Ohio do not talk about things they cannot explain. They just keep living and hope it does not happen again. I drove home that evening on the western side of the county, where the water still tasted like water. I filled a glass from my kitchen sink and stood there drinking it, and I was ashamed of how relieved I felt. Like a man standing on a riverbank, watching other people get pulled downstream and being grateful he is not in the current. A week passed. The sweetness did not recede. If anything, it grew more pronounced. I pulled samples from wells that had previously tested normal and found that faint heaviness, that wrongness, creeping into sources that served communities farther west. The contamination, or whatever it was spreading through the connected aquifer, moving slowly but steadily, like dye dropped into a glass of still water, diffusing outward from whatever source lay beneath the eastern hills. The county did nothing. The health department ran a second round of testing and again found nothing abnormal. My supervisor, a county administrator named Phil Deering, called me into his office and told me to stop alarming people. He said the water tested clean. He said my job was to maintain the mechanical systems, not to play environmental investigator. He said if I kept making noise, the county would face unnecessary panic and potential liability issues. Then he said something that made me go cold. He told me he had personally tried the water from the eastern side of the county. He had filled a glass from the tap at the Bethke fire station just to see what the fuss was about, and he said it tasted perfectly fine to him. Good, actually. He said I was the one with the problem. I looked at his face while he said this. Phil Deering had always been a tense, irritable man, a bureaucrat in the worst sense of the word, pinched and defensive and perpetually worried about the county's exposure to criticism. But sitting across from me in that moment, he looked relaxed, almost serene, and I realized he had been drinking the water. I left his office and went back to the pump station and studied the system maps. The western well fields that served Calvary and my side of the county were still testing normal, but based on the rate the sweetness was spreading through the aquifer, I estimated it would reach the western wells within 2 weeks, maybe less. I spent that week watching the eastern communities from the outside, driving the roads, stopping at houses, making excuses about meter readings and line inspections just so I could talk to people. What I found was more frightening than anything Herschel had described. The complaints had stopped entirely, not because the problem had resolved, because nobody cared anymore. Every person I spoke to in Bethke, Sugar Hill, and along Deerfield Road told me they felt wonderful. A woman in Bethke said her chronic pain was gone. A man in Sugar Hill said his mind was clearer than it had been in decades. Their skin had a healthy flush. Their eyes were bright. They moved and spoke with a calm, deep contentment that should have been reassuring, but instead made every hair on my arm stand up, because these were people who lived hard lives in a hard part of the country, and contentment like that does not come naturally here. It has to be given or taken, and they were staying home. The diner in Calvary, which had always gotten steady lunch traffic from the eastern communities, reported that traffic had dried up almost completely. The Presbyterian church that drew congregants from Bethkey and Sugar Hill had empty pews. The elementary school told me that attendance from the eastern side had dropped significantly. Parents were keeping their children home, not because of illness or protest. They simply did not seem interested in going anywhere. I drove out Deerfield Road one last time that week. The atmosphere in the hollow had changed. The houses were occupied, lights on, chimney smoke rising into the grey sky. But no one was outside. No one was raking leaves or chopping wood or checking their mailboxes. No cars moved along the road. The community had drawn inward, folded tight around itself like a fist closing, and the silence between the hills was absolute. I knocked on June Oleska's door. When she opened it, I barely recognized her. She looked 10 years younger. The deep lines in her face had softened. Her eyes were clear and calm. She smiled at me, and the smile disturbed me in a way I have difficulty putting into words. It was not the smile of a happy person. It was the smile of a person who is full, satisfied in some fundamental way that goes beyond mood or circumstance. Like she had eaten something that filled every empty place inside her. She invited me in for water. Not coffee, not tea. Water. She said it the way someone else might offer you a home-cooked meal, with pride and warmth. She said the water was so good now. She said everyone should be drinking it. I declined and walked back to my truck. My hands were shaking. That night, I drove back to see Herschel. He was one of the only people on the eastern side who had not changed. He had been hauling water from a spring on the ridge behind his property, just like his father had taught him. Spring water that came from a shallow formation above the aquifer, untouched by whatever was spreading through the deeper rock. He told me the changes would accelerate now. The people drinking the sweet water were being prepared. I asked him what that meant. He said he did not know exactly. His father never knew either. But he believed the sweet water was doing something to the people who drank it, changing them from the inside, making them ready for whatever came next. I asked him what happened to the families who disappeared in the late 40s, what he thought actually, physically, happened to them. Herschel was quiet for a long time. The wind pushed through the bare trees outside his house, and the branches clicked together like bones. Then he told me his father had gone to check on one of the empty houses a few days after the families vanished. The house was clean and orderly, nothing disturbed. Beds made, coats hung by the door. But in the kitchen, the tap had been left running, and the water coming out of it was not water anymore. It was dark, nearly black, warm to the touch, and thick, the way the sweet water had been thick, but far more so, like something alive was moving through the pipes. It ran for 3 days, Herschel said. His father went back each morning to check. Each morning, the black water was still flowing from the tap, filling the sink and overflowing onto the floor. On the 4th morning, it stopped. The water ran clear again, cold and tasteless, as if nothing had ever happened. His father never spoke about what he thought the black water was, but he never drank from a well in the Eastern Hollows again for the rest of his life. I tried to raise the alarm. I spent 3 days making phone calls. The State Environmental Protection Agency, the regional offices of the federal EPA. I described the taste changes, the behavioral shifts, the spreading contamination. I referenced the historical disappearances, trying to frame them as a recurring environmental event. I was as calm and professional as I could manage. I was told, politely and firmly, that without abnormal laboratory results, there was no basis for an investigation. One official suggested I contact the county mental health board. Another asked if I was experiencing personal stress that might be affecting my judgment. I called Phil Deering one more time. His voice on the phone was soft, almost dreamy. He told me the water situation was resolved. He said the residents were satisfied, the tests were clean, and the county considered the matter closed. He asked me if I had tried the water lately. He said it really was wonderful. He said I should try it. I hung up. I considered going public. Social media, the local newspaper in the next county over, television stations in Columbus. But I sat in my truck in the pump station parking lot and thought about how the story would sound to anyone who had not tasted that water, who had not felt the wrongness of it, who had not watched an entire community go quiet and still and content in the span of 2 weeks. The water tests clean. The people drinking it say they feel better than they have in years. The only evidence of a problem is an old man's memory of something that happened 3/4 of a century ago, and my own gut feeling that something is deeply, terribly wrong beneath the ground in Brannock County. Nobody would believe me. The thing in the water had made sure of that. The sweetness reached Calvary on a Tuesday morning in the first week of November. I knew the moment it happened because I tasted it in my own water. I had filled a glass from the kitchen tap without thinking, the way I had done 10,000 mornings before. And the moment it touched my tongue, I felt it. That subtle sweetness, that slight heaviness, that warmth that had no business being in water pumped from sandstone 200 feet underground. I spit it into the sink and did not swallow. I drove to the pump station and checked the western wells. Every one of them carried the sweetness now. The entire county water system was compromised. Whatever had started in the deep rock beneath the eastern hills had spread through the connected groundwater until there was no well in Brannock County that it had not reached. The town of Calvary began to change the way the eastern communities had. Slowly at first. People were a little calmer in the mornings, a little friendlier at the gas station and the grocery store. They drank more water. They lingered at home in the evenings instead of going out. The high school football game that Friday had the smallest crowd anyone could remember, not because people were unhappy, but because staying home felt better. I stopped drinking the tap water entirely. I drove 40 minutes to the next county to fill jugs at a gas station. Every time I did, the drive felt longer. Not in actual distance, but in willpower. Each trip required more effort than the last, as if something was pulling at me, gently and constantly, telling me I did not need to do this, telling me the water at home was fine, telling me to stop fighting. I watched Calvary the way I had watched the eastern communities. The contentment spread through the town like warmth through cold fingers. People smiled more. They argued less. The county courthouse, usually a place of low-level tension and bureaucratic friction, became eerily pleasant. Phil Deering walked the halls with a peaceful expression that I had never seen on his face in 15 years of working under him. Everyone was so happy. Everyone was drinking the water. I went to see Herschel one last time. He was packing a bag. A single duffel, old canvas, sitting on the kitchen table half full of clothes. He told me he was leaving, going to stay with his daughter in Columbus. He looked older than I had ever seen him, and tired and afraid. He told me his father had taught him the only rule that matters when the water goes sweet. You leave. You do not try to fight it. You do not try to warn people, because they will not listen. They never listen. The sweet water makes sure of that. It gives them what they want: peace, comfort, relief from the grind of living. And nobody turns that down. Nobody refuses something that feels like the answer to every hard day they have ever had. You just go. You get out of the county and you do not drink any water that comes from these hills, and you wait. Eventually, it ends. The water goes back to normal. New people move in. Life continues. But the people who were here when the sweetness came, the people who drank it and welcomed it and let it change them, those people are gone. They are always gone. I asked Herschel what was going to happen to the people who stayed. He set down the shirt he was folding and looked at me with eyes that carried the weight of an entire lifetime spent knowing something terrible that no one else would believe. He said the same thing that happened before. One morning, someone from outside Brannock County would drive through on their way to somewhere else, and they would notice that the town was quiet. They would stop at the gas station and find it empty. They would knock on doors and get no answer. They would find the houses clean and orderly, beds made, dishes on the shelves, and in every kitchen, the taps would be running. And what came out of them would be dark and warm and alive. He picked up his bag and walked to the door. Before he left, he stopped and looked back at me. He said, "You should come with me." I told him I could not. I told him I had a responsibility to the system and to the people it served. He shook his head slowly and said, "Son, there is no system anymore. There is just the water, and the water is not yours." Then he was gone. His truck pulled out of the driveway and turned west toward the highway, and I watched the taillights disappear around the bend, and I was alone. I did not leave. I told myself it was because of duty, because I had spent 20 years keeping this system running, and I could not walk away from the people who depended on it. That was part of it. But if I am being honest, and I think I owe honesty to whoever is hearing this, the real reason I stayed was simpler and worse. I was tired. I was tired of hauling water from the next county, tired of the long drives and the heavy jugs and the constant effort of resisting something that everyone around me had already accepted. I was tired of being the only person in Brannock County who was still fighting, and the water in my tap smelled sweet, and some part of me that I am not proud of whispered that it might not be so bad, that June Oleska looked healthy, that Phil Deering looked peaceful, that maybe the thing in the water was not a predator, but a gift, and I was the fool for refusing it. That is how it works. That is what Herschel tried to tell me. The warnings do not fail because people are stupid. They fail because the danger does not feel like danger. It feels like the opposite of danger. It feels like everything you have been missing. I am sitting in my truck right now, parked on the ridge above Calvary. It is a cold night in mid-November. Below me, the town is spread across the valley floor, every window lit, chimney smoke rising straight into the windless air. It looks peaceful. It looks like a painting of a small American town on a quiet evening, the kind of image that makes you feel safe just looking at it. But nothing is moving. No headlights on the roads, no figures on the sidewalks, no dogs barking. The town is perfectly, absolutely still, and the sweet smell rising from the valley is so thick I can taste it just breathing the night air. The jug of clean water on my passenger seat is almost empty. I have not made the drive to the next county in 3 days. It is a simple thing, filling a jug. An hour and a half round trip. I have done it a dozen times. But tonight it feels impossible. Tonight, the distance between here and clean water feels like the distance between here and the moon. I think about my kitchen. I think about the tap. I think about how easy it would be to stop fighting, to go home and fill a glass and drink and finally feel what everyone else in this county is feeling. That warmth, that sweetness, that deep, full satisfaction that smooths every rough edge and fills every empty space and makes the whole hard business of being alive feel like something you can finally set down. The warnings were there. Herschel gave them. His father gave them before that. And whoever lived in these hills before the mines and the towns and the roads probably gave them too, in whatever way they could manage. The warnings were always there. We ignored them. Every time we ignored them, because the thing beneath the water understands something essential about people. It understands that a warning only works if the danger feels like danger. And this does not feel like danger. This feels like coming home. I am starting my truck now. I mean to drive to the next county. I mean to fill my jugs and come back and keep going. But my hands turn the wheel toward home instead. And when I walk through my front door and stand at the kitchen sink and turn the tap, the water that fills my glass is clear and sweet and warm. And it is the best thing I have ever tasted. And I drink all of it. And I fill the glass again. And somewhere deep beneath the hills of Brannock County, in the dark rock below the aquifers, in the place where the water comes from, something old and patient and impossibly hungry swallows and is satisfied for now.